today. So welcome. My name's Nate Stirk. I'm the founder and managing director of Skills the Modern Age, and we're really excited to have you here on a Thursday afternoon to talk about this really important idea of customer empathy. So welcome those that haven't been to one of our skill gyms before. For those that have, I can see some familiar faces. Welcome back. We run these skill gyms every month or so in a variety of topics around innovation and design. So before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm meeting today on the Whadjuk land of the Noongar Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We're currently in the Camberang season of the Noongar calendar, which means that here in Perth, it's starting to get a little bit more warm. You're going to see some of the jacarandas start flowering and some of those beautiful Australian native flowers coming out. Now, I know we've got people from all around the world here today. So we had registrations from as far as the US, across the east coast of Australia. But I know many of you are probably joining us from our hometown in Perth. So from wherever you are joining us today, welcome, and we hope you have fun over the next 90 minutes. So just to give a bit of background on our company. So we've been around for about 3.5 years. We're a relatively small team of designers and change makers. And our mission is all about helping people, communities and organizations do good in the world through innovation. And so the way that we do that is we help large organizations and communities innovate through design-led practices, using practices like custom empathy, what we're going to be talking about today. We also have a number of software platforms, and we also have some prototyping services as well, so we actually help people cross the chasm from idea to solution as well. We've been really fortunate over the last couple of years to work with a whole bunch of different organizations across many industries. And this is why I love human-centered design and design thinking, is that it's so transferable across industries, whether you're in education, financial services, whether you're in local government. These sort of skills are something that any leader and any innovator and change maker can use in an effective way. So skill gyms are a bit of a taste tester of some of these skills that we explore in our deeper workshops. They're an opportunity for our community to come together and to really question some of these practices, to contribute our own wisdom and expertise together to answer some tricky questions. So today's going to be super interactive. There's actually going to be heaps of opportunity to work together. So hopefully you're on a laptop and you brought your thinking caps. These are the 3 mindsets we ask you to have when joining today's skill gym. Come prepared to contribute your wisdom and expertise. We want to hear from you, not just, we don't want to be lecturing the whole time. We want you to be able to connect with other like-minded individuals. And most importantly, we want you to have fun with an open mind as well. So today is going to be pretty light-hearted. We're going to play a couple of games. We're going to use a couple of mural boards. But most importantly, we're going to be tackling this really important topic of empathy. So agenda today, we're going to be really exploring 4 key questions. So we're going to start by asking, where did empathy even come from? Is empathy actually useful? Is empathy the same as design research? And really importantly, how do we do better empathy? What is some of the practices or techniques that we've seen that actually work to develop empathic practices? To kick us off, we're going to play a bit of a game. So this is one of our platforms. It's called Icebreaker. It's an online platform for helping people like us kick off events in a fun and creative way. It's got about 6 games on it. We're going to be playing one of the games called Story Emoji. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to pull out your phone and you're going to be scanning a QR code. When you do that, it's going to ask you to put in a nickname, an anonymous nickname, whatever you prefer. And we're going to ask you to respond with 5 emojis around what does empathy mean to you. So the term empathy, using only 5 emojis, what do you think it means? There's no right or wrong answers here. If you've never experienced empathy, or if you're an empathy expert, we hope you can contribute in the same way. So I'll ask you to bring up your phones if you have them. If you don't have your phone handy, you can type that in jointhegame.fun into a web browser as well, but phone's a little bit easier for emojis because it's got the emoji keyboard. So I want you to scan this QR code. It's going to take you to a website, and you're going to put in your nickname, and then you're going to have about 2 minutes to answer that question of what does empathy mean to you. I also invite you to put a camera at this moment if you like, because there's going to be lots of interaction, lots of chat. It would be great to see your faces if you do have your webcam available. All right, so go ahead, scan the QR code. If you're having trouble with that, let me know. You can also just use very simply the URL there, jointhegame.fun, and then there's a join code there as well. QR code's a little bit easier if that works for you. Put it in the chat if you're having any issues. Oh, I can see it's 28 people in here. Awesome. So people often overthink this part. They take a long time to do the emojis. Don't think too deeply about it. The first thing that comes to your mind when you think about empathy. Cool. Okay, so up on the screen, you'll be able to see everyone's responses coming in. So give you another 30 seconds or so. I can see many people have completed. Some are still completing. All right, final 10 seconds. Get your final emojis in there. Okay, so on the bottom right-hand corner of your phone, if you still have that page open, you'll see an opportunity to raise your hand. If you'd like to share your story emoji with the group, I invite you to raise your hand, just like MFAM's done there. So if there's anyone else that wants to do it, please raise your hand. I'm going to invite MFAM to turn on their mic and to share their, where are you, MFAM? There we go. To share their story emoji. Would you like to do that for us?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Michael, M-Fan. I don't know if that's your name, your nickname, but yeah, Michael, welcome, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I think empathy is not only the ability to sense someone else's feelings, whether they're happy, sad, confused, but to actually share in those feelings. So you feel that pain with them, you feel that excitement with them, you feel that joy with them. So that's the connection point there that I kind of think about.
Love it. And I love the bookends of the love hearts. What does that mean? Is that symbolic?
Yeah, that's just the idea that you're feeling those emotions with them.
Yeah, wonderful. So the idea of feeling the emotions with people, I love that idea. Yeah. What about VT? Another nickname. Who's VT out there?
Yeah, I guess I was wanting to express that shoulder to shoulder walking with people. And the asking curious questions to celebrate or commiserate or whatever, to be alongside them. Yeah.
That was this one here, was it?
Yeah.
The smith was the querying. Cool. Anyone else would like to share their story emoji? I can see my friend Dave's here. Dave, would you like to share yours? Where did you go? I'm going to pick on.
Here I am.
Hey Dave, how are you, mate?
Good. I
Just
think
again.
Yeah. I think the big one is just look and listen. I put listen in there twice because I think it's really important to listen to what they're really saying, and it's part of why I'm on this thing today, is because I find, people tell me stuff, but I feel like I don't always listen, and I don't listen deep enough to like what's behind what they're asking for, especially in the software world. They want this, that, or the other thing. And I just think it's important to then react to whatever you heard, which I got I don't know if the fireman or the emergency really helps, but I think it is, it was hard to find the emoji that basically said, let's take action on what we heard and feed that back.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dave. Love it. Yeah, I think this is one of the complex problems with empathy, is that we all know we need to talk to our customers and our stakeholders and our users, the people we serve, but it can be really, really hard to unpick the true motivations. And this is really what we wanted to explore today, is how do we do better empathy? We don't just do empathy as a tokenistic thing or as a service level piece. What is the right way to do it? at a more deeper level. At this moment, I'll also introduce Georgie. So Georgie is one of our team members here at SOMA. She's going to be co-facilitating today's session. So I'm going to kind of take the first half of the session, and then she's going to come in at the end to talk a bit about this piece of what is the best practice. So thank you so much for contributing to that game. That kind of kicks us off, just getting us in the mindset of what this empathy is. The first question that I did want to explore, though, is where does this concept of empathy actually come from? And so I was doing some research in preparation for this, and I was reflecting, I've been teaching empathy for 3.5, 4 years. And what really surprised me was that I'd never really queried about where did this idea even come from? Was it something that has always been around forever, or is it something that's relatively new? In that research, I found this book, which was really interesting, called Empathy, A History. And one of the things I found through that research was that it's actually a really, really contemporary term. It's not something that has been around for hundreds of years. In fact, it's only really less than 150 years old. Our English term empathy comes from this German word Einfühlung, which I can't say. I can't speak German, unfortunately, even though I have a German background. But what this German word means is it means in feeling. And so many of you in your what does empathy actually mean to you, you mentioned that idea of feeling, that idea of emotion, or that idea of really deeply feeling the emotions of another person. And so this word was actually only coined in 1873 in Germany. So that's how new this concept of empathy in the modern sense that we know today. And then it kind of made its way through a little bit of research. It was then only in 1908, the English version of empathy was first mentioned in academic papers. It comes from in Greek meaning in, and pathos meaning feeling. So literally a direct translation of in feeling, empathy, and pathos. And then there was a series of research done in the middle of the last century by this lady called Rosalind Cartwright. She kind of did the first research into interpersonal empathy. And then it really wasn't until like the 1950s that we even had it in non-academic senses. So of course, people were still empathic. They still had these behaviors. They probably even had some empathic practices in solution development, but they didn't actually use this term empathy. But now many of you, I would suspect, would be designers in the room or have some design background. We see empathy in every shape and form in our life. So we often hear of people needing to be empathic leaders. Even the government put people on empathy training not that long ago. It is just something that has become completely commonplace, particularly in the circles in which we operate. And we can see this in our Google Trends. This only goes back to 2004, but over the last 15, 20 years, we've seen this constant and steady, consistent increase in interest over time. And so empathy is one of those things you come across in multiple contexts. Most of the work that we do with empathy comes from these guys. So design thinking from the Stanford D School, or HumanCentered Design by IDEO. And many of you will be familiar with design thinking. For those that haven't heard of design thinking, it's essentially a creative problem-solving approach that puts the user at the center. And so when we work with our clients on design-based projects, design sprints, solution product sprints, we're generally using these 5 stages. These are the 5 standard stages of most design thinking processes. And you'll notice that it actually starts with empathy. It starts with deeply understanding our customers' needs, wants, goals, and motivations. And through this workshop, we're going to be talking a little bit about how we do that, some of the pitfalls, and also some of the opportunities to improve the way we do empathy work. And so again, this is a conversation and a contribution from yourselves as well. We don't want to tell the way we do it. We want to hear the way that you think about and practice empathy. The most common way I explain empathy in that context is putting ourselves in the shoes of another. It's about the ability to be able to see the world through their eyes. And as you said before, Michael, deeply feeling what it is they need, how they're experiencing something, and how they might respond. And so I often use the analogy of putting yourself in the shoes of another individual, walking a day or a mile in their life to understand the world from their situation. So throughout today, we're going to have to do a little bit of breakout sessions as well. And so to warm ourselves up with that, we're going to be doing a really, really simple breakout discussion. So no mural board, just an open discussion in small groups. And in your small group, this is what I'd like you to discuss. So what are some of the ways that you practice empathy in your work? Not necessarily in a design context, even if you're in a leadership position or you're working in any role or in any community, there's ways that you are already practicing empathy. And so in your groups, I just wanted you to chat about some of those that can be related to design, or it cannot be related to design either or. So let's have a look. We've got 30 people. So you're going to be in groups of about, should we say 6, Georgie?
Yep, I reckon.
Cool. All right. So for those that haven't used Zoom breakout rooms before, I'm sure you have, been 2 years into the pandemic, but for those that haven't, you're going to receive a notification in a moment on your laptop. You're going to click accept. You're going to be sucked to the Zoom room. You're going to have about 6 minutes to have a chat about that question around some of the practices that you already have around empathy. And you're going to have a chance to talk about it as a group. And then we're going to come back together after about 6 minutes and we'll reflect as a larger group. Cool. So gonna have 5 breakout rooms of 5 to 6 participants. So they'll come up now. And so Melissa, you've said, I've got a group of 4 of us within my company. Do you want us to be added to another group or keep as one already made? It's randomly assigned. So you might be in a group with the same people or you might not, Melissa, either or, it's completely fine. Cool. All right. So you have 6 minutes. What are some of the ways you practice empathy in your work today? So have a chat about that. We're going to come back and play that as a group in a moment. You should receive the notification now. Just pause that recording. What did you think, Casey? Was it too long or too short time? In the
About right, actually.
About right. Cool.
Yep, we got round everyone.
Was that conversation or crickets?
It was conversation.
Good. Always a bit risky, but.
Yeah.
All right, we're just waiting for everyone else to come back in. We've got 3 more seconds. I'm going to come in back. Yeah, cool. Wonderful. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you got to meet some other interesting people in your breakout rooms and had a bit of a chat. I'd love if any brave individual would like to share some of the conversation that they had in their group, even if it's just a couple of points around some of the ways that they've been practicing empathy in their roles. Otherwise, I'll just pick on someone if I don't get a volunteer. Thanks, Danny. That's great.
So our group comes from different industry and backgrounds. We had, customers can be anything from a client for a tech firm to a student in a high school to an entrepreneur. And we were talking about the way that we try to understand not only the maybe business, but the social experiences of the people that we're talking to and how to integrate that into how we work with them. And also David brought up a good point, which I thought was that it's also about understanding when your customer, whoever that might be, asks you for something, they might be really asking for something else, and it's trying to get to the bottom of that, what they might not share up front, but what they're really trying to get to.
Yeah, and often people aren't even aware that they're doing that, right? I used to love this quote from Roald Dahl's BFG, and it was, what I say and what I mean are 2 different things. And I think that's so true in a lot of contexts, particularly, when we're doing interviews and those sort of things, where we're doing structured research. If it's not done in the right way, we can get, people telling us surface motivations or surface needs rather than those really deep pieces. So yeah, I think that's a really great point. Thanks, Danny. Paul, you've dobbed in Doris. Doris had a great story. Doris, would you mind sharing, if that's okay? Sorry, blame Paul, not me.
Yep, that's all good. Hi guys, I'm Doris. So in our group, we kind of talked about customer empathy interviews, usability testing, as we come from different backgrounds in like software and software development and strategy. And so I'm actually in Auckland, and I work for a local government transport agency. So we do a lot of customer empathy interviews to have a deep dive into customers' experiences on when they use our products and services. So we do a lot of customer empathy interviews. We also do trainings. So just doing this kind of standard open-ended questions, letting them know, our customers know that this is a safe space for them to talk. And we kind of do this ratio of we talk for 10% and let them talk for the rest of the 90%. And it's really just us actively listening to them. And as you said, like a lot of the insights, it's not wasn't spoken, that is those like really good nuggets that can help you on your like I guess design thinking process. So just doing a lot of that and using a lot of I don't know, just a lot of techniques to really dig in deep on what your customers are feeling and their experiences. Yeah. And
how did you build up your capability to be able to do those interviews? So is that something that you were taught or something you built up through learned experience? What's your approach to be confident that you're running those interviews in a constructive way? Yeah, so we do them by just practice, just doing them on the job. We do also, so my team, we do run a empathy interview training session for anyone in our business who is interested or wants to try it out. But for me, as an experienced designer, we just do it when we have sprints, and they just kind of put you in the deep end. We also have the sprint team, the core team, also participate in the empathy interviews because it's very valuable for them to also listen to all the feedback or experiences that the customers are expressing. Because a lot of the time they kind of hide behind, but they just have a lot of assumptions that they gather from data or, with mouth, and they don't put themselves in the customer. So we really encourage everyone to do that when they come through our team for a sprint, to just get involved and really just ask those deep and meaningful questions to their customers to validate some of the assumptions that we have going. Yeah, great. And so important getting more than just one person doing those interviews, right? There's so much of that implicit knowledge that's built by actually sitting there and listening and actually undertaking them, rather than getting the report of all the interview insights. Yeah. Just before we move on from this conversation, is there anyone else that would like to share their experience in practicing empathy in their roles, the way that they might do it? Vicky?
One thing that we discussed was giving the time and space to be able to listen and hear, like, yeah, making sure you're not doing all the talking, but also knowing that people aren't rushed, or they can see you're not rushed, so that there is the space to be able to talk and listen.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Environment, context, tone, it all matters about getting the right outcomes. But I'm sure many of you would agree that doing interviews are actually really, really tricky things, and they're super time intensive as well. They're not easy to do. And that's kind of why I asked you that question, Doris, around how you were trained to do it, because I find that it's not something that anyone can pick up and do effectively. And sometimes it's dangerous to give people the tool of interviews and to do them in the wrong way, where you might get false insights. And I always joke, that's why market research companies get paid the big bucks, is because it's a science as much as it is an art. You can't just walk in being a lovely person, being empathic, and expect to get really, really key crystal insights unless you've been trained, I think. So we've talked a lot about interviewing. There's a bunch of other, of course, research methods that we look at. So these are kind of all the different things, or some of the different things rather, that you could be looking at empathy-based design research. So many of you will be familiar with these. People always jump to surveys because it seems a little bit easier than having to sit down and do interviews. But we know there's lots of challenges and issues with the validity of survey data, depending on how they're done. Co-design is a big one. For those that haven't experienced that before, co-design is about actually working with your customers to develop the solution rather than just ask them and getting them in the room and actually building it with them. Empathy maps is a big one that we see a lot of people using, and we'll talk about those in a moment and some of the foibles there. And then things like observation and ethnography, of course, as well. So there's lots of different ways that we can build up our idea of empathy, and they all have their own strengths and weaknesses, and we want to talk about that in a moment. But a lot of times what we see is organizations, and even the work that we do, follows a similar approach to this. We might start by doing some empathy mapping based on our own experience, trying to surface those assumptions. So what do we think we know? What do we definitely know? And what do we don't know about our potential customers or stakeholders? We then might move into interviews or focus groups. I'm not a big fan of focus groups. I find them not as useful as interviews. And then we might reinforce that with a higher sample size through surveys or quant data collection. And then we might, as we get to our solution experience, loop back and actually bring in some customers to do co-design work. The challenge with a lot of this is that it's really time intensive, it's really expensive. And so selling this sort of stuff to your stakeholders can be really, really difficult, as many of you know. And I think, as you kind of said as well, Doris, building up skills in this area takes time. It needs practice and it needs support and it needs opportunity to find things that work and don't work. Generally, this is a broad brush, and probably you can be contrary on some of these ideas, but essentially this is why I see the spectrum of truthiness when it comes to some of these tactics. So empathy maps generally are full of our own assumptions. There's a little bit of truth to them, but not validated truth. Surveys, again, people are really bad at telling you or forecasting future needs. So asking people for features and benefits that they want in a product or solution through a survey often gets red herrings or false insights. Interviews are great because you can see the body language, you can see the emotion, you can query deeper on things you don't understand that you can't do in surveys. But ultimately, the best type of empathy is always going to be through observation, by experiencing it with someone and actually seeing them in a real context and seeing how they behave. So for our next discussion, we're going to jump back into our breakout rooms. I want to understand what you think are the good design practices or good research practices for eliciting real empathy. What do you think? What have you seen in your own life that works well, and those things that you haven't seen work well? And for those things that do work well, why do they work? What have you done to make sure that it have been effective, that they're as true to the true desires of our customers? So I'm going to put you into different breakout rooms this time. The question you're going to be talking about is which design tactics are actually really good at eliciting real empathy based on your experience. You can have a bit of a debate. Some of you might have some different views. You're going to be still in groups of about 6, but you're going to be in different groups this time. So hopefully an opportunity to meet some different people. Before I jump into that, does anybody have any questions or thoughts on those design practices? Any of those that I called out that you were aware of or a bit unsure about? Cool. All right, so I'm going to open up the rooms again. We have a bit of a debate about which of these techniques are good at eliciting real empathy. I'm going to open the rooms now. Yes. Jess, are you there? Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. All right, I'd love if anyone's got any really controversial ones. You can dob other people in now. It's free for all. Paul did it to Doris, so everyone else can do it now. Has anyone got any really controversial opinions on how to create or elicit empathy effectively? Beulah, anyone? Anyone had a good conversation in the room they want to dob someone in? Okay, I'm just going to pick on someone. I'm going to pick on Paul because Paul dubbed in Doris. There you go. Would you mind, Paul, sharing what you talked about? And you've got a lovely background as well. So
yeah,
it's
just
nice
by
to
the
look
beach,
at.
of course. Yeah. What do we talk about? So I guess there was a bit of a consensus amongst our group that there was probably interviews were probably like somewhat the most accessible and trusted and sort of somewhat structured approach that all of us would sort of use. I think, yeah, so I guess there was a consensus around that and obviously different ways of doing that, and it could be structured or unstructured. I think I sort of made the observation that like in my particular circumstance, like we're really good at doing that with, I have 2 customer roles. I have like our external customers and our internal customers. And I think we're somewhat good with external customers, but I don't think we have any sort of structured framework with internal customers, which is kind of interesting. Yeah.
It is
so,
interesting. Yeah. Is that because it's almost perceived to be not as, it's not required to be as formalized because it's easier access. So you can kind of sit down and have the coffee, but at the same time, that means that it's not structured.
I think actually definitely a bit of both. But I think also like it was also raised, I can't remember the group member's name, raised that also sometimes like we don't want to like interrupt our team members' day because obviously like people working really hard on things, and so we don't want to take that structured time out to do that. Whereas so maybe like rely on more observational and we informal like internal, but with external we like have very much structured processes, whether it be interview or co-design or prototyping or whatever.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. Who else can I pick on? Maybe Ashley. Would you mind sharing? Sorry.
Sure.
Hi, Ashley, good to see you again. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thanks.
So I made the comment that in some of the work that I do in the youth justice sector, sometimes surveys are our only option to access those young people. So when you're working with a client cohort that's extremely vulnerable and underage and difficult to access, sometimes just getting that little bit of insight that you can get through a survey is better than nothing. So we're looking at the process now, putting in a youth advisory council in 2022, but that's a long and drawn out complex process. So in the meantime, we do what we can, and we do short form, low literacy levels required surveys just to get that tiny bit of customer insight.
Yeah, great. So the Customer Advisory Council, what's the strategy there? Is it a large sample or is it a small panel?
So yeah, it'd be a small panel of young people who are currently engaged in the system. So we're having to navigate all of these technicalities around identification of young people who are involved in the justice system, paying young people for their time, paying people who might be under the working age as well. So we're dealing with these like child labour practices, making sure that everything's above board. So it becomes complex, but we're hoping to get a panel of about 5 or 6 young people to come in once every 2 months and provide feedback and advice on where the organisation should be going.
Yeah, great, wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Ashley. Does anybody else would like to share before we move on to the next piece? Cool. All right. So before we get into the next piece, I think the really important question is what's wrong with them? So we know we need to do it. Everybody sounds like they are doing it in various forms. But we know there's probably some challenges there as well. Like anything that becomes a buzzword or an expectation, it often or can lose the deeper meaning. And doing some research, I came across this. I don't know if anyone's heard of this story. These are called the Ford empathy bellies. So Ford, in their attempt to make their workers, particularly in the factories, more empathic or to understand the concept of empathy, they asked many of them to wear these pregnancy bellies. They also went as far to wear different suits that actually made them feel like they were aging, so they could empathize with the aging population or the older people within the workforce. And I kind of looked at this and I thought, that's a very, very interesting. Vicky said, I don't think the boobs are big enough in the chat. I think, this is an interesting a piece of, what was achieved here. Yes, they may have felt the physical effects. Did they feel the emotional pieces? Potentially not. Going back to the idea of empathy being the concept of in-feeling, I think this might be an example of maybe empathy too far, potentially. But there are some challenges with empathy. I think many of you would have seen and kind of understand as well. So there's a great article in HBR that kind of summarized the 3 key problems. I think these problems are pretty accurate in my experience. So problem 1, it's bloody exhausting doing interviews. You spend a day doing interviews. It's not the preparation for them, but actually doing them, the intense concentration, the ability to be able to put yourself in the shoes and to really deeply try to listen and empathize can be super, super exhausting. I think we've all probably felt that before. Problem 2 is probably a bit more controversial. So this article claims it's zero sum, and George and I were talking about this in the lead up to this workshop. What this is basically saying is, do you have a finite amount of empathy? So if I empathize with my partner, does that mean I have less empathy to give to my co-workers? Is there a finite pool, and that if you can't empathize with everyone is what this basically says? I'm not quite certain on that, but I definitely think it's related to problem number 1, is that it is exhausting. So you can't be constantly switching on the empathy piece in every conversation potentially. And lastly, it can erode ethics. So I think there's a bunch of research around is some empathy immoral? But this article specifically talks about the fact that there's lots of behavioral research that talks about that when you're designing solutions, you're more likely to cheat if you're doing it on behalf of someone else. And so with this, if you're deeply empathizing with people, there's a challenge that you might skirt around the ethics to please one individual because you've done some deep empathy work with them. I think we can definitely say that empathy is worthwhile, that it definitely is a practice that has become useful and relevant for a reason, but it's also super, super challenging, as we've all experienced. So let's get into solution mode. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Georgie, and we're going to start talking about some of these opportunities to do better empathy. So far we've talked about where it's come from, what is empathy, how we do it, and some of the challenges. I'm going to hand over to Georgie, who's going to be talking about some of those opportunities that we've seen to do better empathy and to kind of bring together your expertise to have this conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing. Georgie, you want to share your screen now?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Nate. So I just want to preface this section by, saying we don't have the silver bullet, and I don't think there is a silver bullet to doing, the best empathy, but here, these are just some things, at Soma that we really like and we think help us to do better empathy. And I think at its core of trying to improve the empathy practices that we use, it's really, and you guys touched on it before in the discussion, it's how can we really understand what our users really think and feel. It's getting, beyond that surface level to understand the underlying motivations. And there's this old adage, I try to research where it came from, but it's very controversial of who first said this. But it's that idea that people don't want to drill. What they want, is a hole in the wall. So it's, in our empathy practices, how do we dig below the surface? And one way that we like to do this is understanding this framework of jobs to be done. So there's a great article here that we'll send through in an email after the session, but it essentially outlines that you have to understand your customers and what they're trying to achieve. So in for every behavior, every action, you need to think about what is the customer trying to make progress on or trying to accomplish in a given circumstance. And that when we buy, a product, a service, whatever the offering is, essentially what we're doing is we're hiring it to help us achieve, what we're trying to accomplish. And so if we get the outcome that we're looking for, if we like it, then we're likely to hire that product again. But if we don't like it, then we're going to fire it and we're going to choose something different next time. What's really important with this idea of, jobs to be done and what are customers or users actually trying to accomplish? It's not just about the functional issue that they're trying to accomplish, for example, with the drill. It's not just, the hole in the wall. There are often these powerful social and emotional dimensions. So, maybe they want the hole in the wall because they want to hang up a picture of their family so that they can feel more connected to their family, or maybe it's a picture of their hometown. so that they have that kind of nostalgia factor. So it's really important to think about these social and emotional dimensions as well. And why this is important is because at the, I guess at the surface level and at, I guess behaviors can look the same when we see them. So this is the example I give. There are these two guys. I actually think they might be the same person, just different sides, but we're going to run that they're two different people, but they've both gone and bought this Patagonia puffer jacket. So if we have a look at their demographics, they're the same, style, the same, everything, looks the same. So what, if we're not empathizing, if we're not understanding those jobs to be done, what they're actually trying to accomplish through this purchase, we might think that they're the same. But what we might see is that this guy on the left, he's actually bought this jumper or this jacket because he really cares about the environment, and Patagonia is, known to be a very sustainable brand, very environmentally conscious brand. So the job to be done that he's trying to accomplish is, how can I live my values of this environmental sustainability? Whereas the other guy, well, what has happened with him is that he's seen all his co-workers at work also have this Patagonia jacket. And so he really wants to fit in and he wants to be a part of that. So his job to be done is actually this, this sense of belonging and connection to his co-workers. So even though it looks like the same thing on the surface, there's two very different driving motivations. So as designers, it's really important for us to understand those. And this links to a topic that comes from the field of consumer behavior, looking at motivations and motives of consumers and users. And there are two different kind of types of motives that they classify. There's manifest motives, and these are kind of the motives that people know and can freely admit. These are kind of the surface ones that might be easier to see, easier to understand, especially if we're using things like observation. Even in interviews, it's what people might say first, when they're asked the why questions, and they often relate to the more functional needs. Then there are latent motives, and these are motives that users or consumers might not even be aware of, or they might be reluctant to admit. And this is kind of the things that hang below the surface, that often relate to those more emotional or social needs. So to give you an example, if we think about buying a Louis Vuitton handbag, we ask someone directly, why did you buy this handbag? They might say things like, it's a high quality, well-made product. It's made by a reputable brand. And I experience, superior customer service and after sales care. Maybe they get a glass of champagne when they're buying it in the store. But if we dig deeper and think about what might be the latent motives behind this, those social emotional ones, it might actually be that it's an expensive bag and so it will make me look successful. It symbolizes wealth, so people are going to think I'm important and respected. Celebrities, have one, so it will make me feel just as special as them. So it's really these latent motives that we're trying to understand. So what I'm going to get you guys to do now, I want you to have a think about this, and have a go at thinking about what these jobs to be done might be, and these manifest and latent motives in the context of someone buying a Tesla. So I'm going to link you to a mural board that you can complete in your groups. And I really want you to have a think about what are some of the functional jobs, jobs in inverted commas, that this Tesla might be helping someone to achieve. And what are some of the social and emotional, those latent motives? What are some of those things that a Tesla might be helping to achieve for someone? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put in the chat links to 5 mural boards. So they're in there now. And when I put you into the breakout rooms, just have a look before you click accept on the room, just have a look at what number room you're in, and then press the link to that mural board and you should be taken to the correct one. If you have any troubles, let me know. Press the, ask for assistance in your breakout room and I can come in and paste it in. All right. Are there any questions before we get into it? No? All right.
I'll just pause recording. Today, recording, there we go. So the reason why we kind of came together today was to really bring together the expertise of this community to start to query this idea of how do we do better customer empathy. So hopefully you've got a little bit out of it today. At the very least, hopefully you've met someone else interesting that you might be able to connect with in the future. So we run these every month or so. This is our last one for 2021, but we're going to be back early next year with a refreshed calendar. We're actually going to be doing a whole bunch of work similar to this topic of actually doing our own customer discovery to understand what our community needs from these skill gyms. So do you like the breakouts? Do you want more guests? Do you want more case studies? What's the sort of things that you would like? So you'll receive an email in the next week or so from Georgia and myself inviting you to participate in an interview or a research session. And we'd absolutely love your feedback if that's at all possible. There is a bit of a feedback survey today that I'm really keen to get you filling out. So in the chat, you'll see a survey link. While you're doing that, I will talk about a few other things we've got coming up for SOMA. So I'll just quickly share my screen. So for those that haven't seen it, we have something called Workshop Play Shop. So we've got over 40 free design innovation tools. Most of them are ours. Some of the other ones are ones that we think are great and we use as part of our work. Some of them have tutorials, a couple of them have videos, but really it's just a bank of tools and canvases that we like to use. And they're all free, I should say. The other piece we have is the good people. So if you're interested in social impact, we have an online boot camp that would be delivered a number of times through a cohort-based experience. We're now offering that as a self-paced experience. It's super affordable, about $200 Australian, but it's got a whole heap of content about how you use design in a social impact context, which is something really close to our heart. And lastly, you've used the Icebreaker platform today. If you want to sign up for that, it's completely free. We do have a pro plan now as well, and we've actually got 6 games there. So if you want to have a bit of a play and use that in your own workshops and meetings, you're more than welcome to. But if you can take a moment just to fill out that feedback survey. I just want to thank everybody for attending today. I really, really enjoy running these sessions, and we absolutely love bringing our community together. I was looking at the list. We've got people from the US, we've got Mexico, we've got Adelaide, we've got a whole bunch of diverse people. It's absolutely awesome to do that from little old Perth. So thank you so much for joining. You're more than welcome to hang around and have a chat if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll let you go and get on with your day. But thanks again. And thanks, Georgie, for co-facilitating.